a Mexican cruise. What's the difference? It is Michael.
For tic-tac-toe and $201,950, name her.
Joan of Arc.
Yes, for tic-tac-toe.
1, 6.
Yes.
9, 14.
You want to save some time there?
You. Suspense.
$21,500.
Your piano playing.
Things you practice.
TV game shows in the 1980s just hit different. There were cheesy sets and tech, hilarious hairstyles and fashion, the extremely wide and interesting array of prizes, and of course the legendary hosts. And that's why I've made a list of my favorites. No, the best 1980s TV game shows. This has nothing to do with ratings or if the show ran for a ton of seasons. This is all about what I loved as a kid and considered the best TV game shows that the 1980s had to offer. Some of these had earlier versions that ran in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s. Others had later versions that ran in the 90s and 2000s. And there are also games on this list that are still on the air to this day. But for this top 25, we are talking specifically about the versions of each game that ran in the 1980s. Or mostly in the 80s. If it started in 78 and ran through 1983, it qualifies. But if it's like Match Game and started in 1973 and ended in 81, no deal. Not eligible for this list. So, now that you know the rules, let's get into it. Before we get to the top 25, I've got to bring out my honorable mentions. Name That Tune and Face the Music. The first daily version of the $100,000 Name That Tune popped up in the mid-80s for one season with host Jim Lang, and even though the bid-a-note round is iconic, this show didn't crack my top 25 list because as a kid, I didn't know any of the songs, and it was no fun for me to play as a viewer. No matter how many notes they gave, the song catalog used was mostly tunes from before 1980, so little 8-year-old me just couldn't name that tune, no matter what. The same goes for Face the Music. Sure, it was hosted by Tarzan, but it was just too much of an adult show for little 3-year-old me to enjoy. Still, I wanted to mention these shows because they're fun to watch in hindsight, and they're both memorable 80s game shows that were pretty great in their own way. Number 25, Tic-Tac-Toe. Based on the simple kids game Tic-Tac-Toe, contestants on Tic-Tac-Toe answered questions in various categories to put up their X or O on the board. Produced by Barry and Enright, the 80s version began as a CBS network game show before a shift into syndication. It ran from 1978 to 1986, and for most of its run, it was hosted by Wink Martindale. Tic-Tac-Toe was the first game show to use computerized graphics, which automatically earns it a spot on my 80s best of list. The game board was made up of 9 Apple II systems, connected to individual computer monitors to represent each game screen, all linked to a central Altair 8800 computer, which displayed the categories, X's and O's, bonus game numbers and amounts, and of course, the dreaded dragon. Number 24, the New Hollywood Squares. Sticking with the tic-tac-toe theme, and this time we have 1980 celebrities. From 1986 to 1989, the New Hollywood Squares had a syndication run with John Davidson as host. There was also Shadoe Stevens as the announcer, Jim J. Bullock in the upper left-hand corner, and Joan Rivers as the center square. Number 23, The Joker's Wild. Trivia questions plus a slot machine game board equals The Joker's Wild, the game where knowledge is king and Lady Luck is queen. Originally popular with a network run in the early 70s, a syndicated version of The Joker's Wild from Barry and Enright ran from 1977 to 1986. It was created and originally hosted by Jack Barry, who was involved in the famous 1950s quiz show scandals. When Barry died in 1984, the final 2 seasons of that syndicated run was hosted by Bill Cullen. And yes, when it was rebooted in 2017, The Joker's Wild was hosted by Snoop Dogg. Number 22, the new Newlywed Game. There have been many different versions of the Newlywed Game since its TV debut in 1966. But for this list, we are talking about the extremely yellow new Newlywed Game, produced by Chuck Barris Industries, that ran in syndication from 1985 to 1989. It was hosted by Bob Eubanks, who will forever be connected to this game thanks to his censorship-avoiding phrase, making whoopee. Young newly married couples got the chance to win cash, appliances, furniture, and vacations on this fun, sometimes awkward, and always extremely 80s TV game show. Number 21, Bumper Stumpers. Okay, this one is technically from Canada. It's not American, but I watched it as an 80s kid in America on the USA Network in association with Barry and Enright Productions. So it earns a spot on my list. Bumper Stumpers ran from 1987 to 1990 and was hosted by a guy named Al Dubois. Basically, contestants had to solve puzzles created via vanity-style license plates, and the game's big prize was $5,000. Number 20, Card Sharks. The first entry on the list from the legendary Mark Goodson and Bill Todman Productions, Card Sharks ran on NBC with host Jim Perry from 1978 to 1981, and then it returned a few years later and ran on CBS with host Bob Eubanks from 1986 to 1989. The game featured two contestants who attempted to predict the outcome of survey questions to gain control of a row of oversized playing cards, and then they had to determine whether the next card drawn was higher or lower. Number 19, Win, Lose, or Draw. If board games were a thing for your family in the 1980s, then chances are you're familiar with the game Pictionary, where players guessed words or phrases that were drawn by their teammate. But long before that game hit the market, Burt Reynolds was playing his own version of the game at his own house at parties, which he explained to Johnny Carson in 1978.
It was a good party.
Well, if you'd invited me, I probably would have.
Really? We played charades. Would you like to do that?
You're kidding.
Well, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
You played charades
Yeah,
at
but
this
they're
party?
very
It
special
sounds like a
charades.
sparkler.
They're special.
You had pin the tail on the donkey, too, and spin
It was
the
a
bottle?
different kind of charades. You have to draw it,
Makes it very interesting.
and not with chalk.
That game turned into Win, Lose, or Draw, produced by Reynolds and Bert Convy. It was syndicated from 1987 to 1990, and the show was hosted by Bert Convy, then later by Vicki Lawrence. The set? Well, that was inspired by Burt Reynolds' living room. Number 18, Love Connection. Is Love Connection a game show? Yes, it's a dating game show. P.S. I almost put the dating game on this list, but it got bumped at the last second. I had to mention Love Connection because of the unique premise, the cultural impact, the amazing fashion and hairstyles, and of course, Chuck Woolery, who always reminded us that he would be back in 2 and 2. Number 17, Blockbusters. Blockbusters is another game show from Mark Goodson, Bill Todman Productions, and it had two separate runs in the 1980s. Contestants would answer general knowledge questions to complete a path across or down the game board, which was composed of hexagons. It initially debuted on NBC in October of 1980 and aired until April of 82. In the first series, a team of 2 family members would compete against a solo contestant, which was kind of odd. When it was revived on NBC in 1987, the show featured only 2 solo contestants competing, and to me that made more sense. But honestly, either way, I loved it. Bill Cullen hosted the version from 80 to 82, and then Bill Rafferty would host the 1987 version of Blockbusters. Number 16, Double Dare. If you were a kid in the 80s and had access to cable, Nickelodeon's Double Dare was a must-watch after school starting in 1986. It was so popular that the show more than tripled viewership for Nickelodeon's afternoon lineup, and it became the most-watched original daily program on cable television. Seriously, every 80s kid dreamed about being on Double Dare. Hosted by Mark Summers, the show featured 2 teams of Gen X contestants facing off to win cash and prizes by answering trivia questions and competing in physical challenges. By far, the most iconic part of Double Dare was the ending, the obstacle course, and if a team could beat it and find all the flags, they would win thousands of dollars in cash and prizes. Number 15, Classic Concentration. Fun fact, as I research and write the script for this video, I'm actually watching old episodes of Classic Concentration, also known as Alex Trebek's other game show. The original version of Concentration debuted back in the 60s and was created by Jack Barry and Dan Enright, names which you've already heard me say a lot. But the version that makes this list is a remake called Classic Concentration, hosted by Trebek, which ran on NBC from May of 87 to August of 91. Like the original, Classic Concentration involved the combination of the children's card matching game known as Concentration and the use of a rebus puzzle that was revealed as the matching cards were removed from the board. My favorite part of this game show, though, was the bonus round, where a contestant could win a car by quickly matching 7 pairs of different makes and models in just a few seconds. Number 14. I'm Telling. Oh, I can see the comments section now with this pick. How could I choose I'm Telling as a better kids game show than Double Dare? Well, it's probably because I'm a girl, and it involved gameplay based on how much you know your siblings. Not to mention those prizes. This show was an 11-year-old girl's dream in the late 80s, especially if she had an annoying little brother to play with like I did. I gotta be honest, this show's a special one for me and my brother. I'm Telling only lasted for one season, from September of 87 to May of 88, but it aired on Saturday mornings after cartoons, and for me, it was the coolest show on TV at the time. Oh, and did I mention there was an episode featuring the late Paul Walker as a contestant with his little sister? I highly recommend. Number 13. Hot Potato. NBC network game shows in the 80s were my jam. I can't tell you how much I loved Hot Potato as a kid. I remember this show vividly, so I was shocked during my research when I discovered that it only aired for 6 months, from January to June 1984. Apparently, this one hit the rerun circuit hard. Another show from Barry and Enright, it was hosted by the legendary Bill Cullen and featured contestants who were 3 of a kind, attempting to answer survey questions or passing the hot potato to their opponent. In the bonus round, teams had the chance to win $5,000 by answering comparison questions from a specific category about 2 different items or groups. Number 12. $1 Million Chance of a Lifetime. The $1 Million Chance of a Lifetime aired in syndication from January of 86 until May of 87 and was hosted by Jim Lang. I remember this game for its oversized keyboard and giant computer screen, as well as the pointless isolation booth they used in the final round. But obviously what made it stand out for me as an 80s kid was the mind-blowing $1 million prize, which was a big deal back then. During its 2-season run, a total of 9 couples actually won the million, which was paid out over 20 years at $50,000 per year. And even though the production company Lorimar went out of business in 1989, the winners still got paid and received their annual checks all the way through 2009. Number 11. Password Plus and Super Password. Password Plus and Super Password aired separately between 1979 and 1989, and both were revivals of Password, which originally aired from 1961 to 1975 in various incarnations. Another Goodman-Todman production, Password Plus was originally hosted by the legendary Alan Ludden, also known as Betty White's husband. Betty, God rest her soul, was a mainstay on TV game shows for decades, especially on Password. Password Plus aired from January of 79 until March of 82 for 801 episodes. Then Super Password aired for 1,151 episodes between 1984 and 1989. Ludden hosted Password Plus from the show's debut in 79 until October of 1980 after his stomach cancer diagnosis, and he was ultimately replaced by Tom Kennedy. Ludden died on June 9th, 1981, and then Kennedy hosted the show until its end in 82. The host of Super Password during its entire 6-season run was Bert Convy. Number 10. Body Language. From Mark Goodson Productions, Body Language was a charades-inspired game show that aired on CBS from 1984 to 1986, and it was hosted by Tom Kennedy. The prizes were all cash, with a $25,000 limit. Contestants could keep coming back until they reached that amount, and then they had to retire. I loved Body Language growing up. There was just something about it that made it so much fun to watch. It was on back-to-back with another Goodson production show called Tattletales, which almost made this list, but the best one of that show was in the 70s, not the 80s revival. So I chose Body Language, and I loved it so much it made my top 10. Oh, and did I mention this show had lots of Betty White? Number 9, Remote Control.
Kenny wasn't like the other kids.
TV mattered. Nothing else did.
Girl said yes, but he said
No. Remote control. Now he's got his own game show. Remote control.
The most Gen X TV game show ever created, despite being hosted by a boomer, Remote Control aired on MTV from 1987 to 1990. It was hosted by Ken Ober and featured comedian Colin Quinn, model Kari Warher, and a very young Adam Sandler. The show's theme song explained that Ober was addicted to TV growing up and desperately wanted to be a game show host. To make his dream come true, he set up the basement of his childhood home as a television studio. 3 contestants would sit in lounge chairs and select one of 9 channels on a big screen TV, with each channel representing a subject having to do with pop culture. Channels covered different topics and had weird names like the Bon Jovi Network, Brady Physics, and Dead or Canadian. Number 8, Jeopardy! Yes, I know Jeopardy is still on the air. It's literally been on TV since the early 80s, but I couldn't skip it just because there's a version still in syndication. 80s Jeopardy was its own thing, with an old school game board, lower cash amounts and winner totals, and a darker haired Alex Trebek. Created by Merv Griffin, Jeopardy actually dates back to the 60s and was originally hosted by Art Fleming. Trebek took over in 1984 when the show was relaunched for syndication. The most famous element of Jeopardy, besides the answers being in the form of a question, is the song titled Think that plays over Final Jeopardy. It's 30 seconds long and was written by Griffin as a lullaby for his son. Before his death, Griffin estimated that Think earned him royalties of over $70 million in his lifetime. True story. Number 7, Sale of the Century. Another game show that originally debuted in the 60s, Sale of the Century made a comeback in the 80s via NBC as well as syndication. It ran from 1983 to 1989 and was hosted by Jim Perry and Summer Bartholomew. The game consisted of contestants answering general knowledge questions at $5 a pop. There were also instant bargains, which was the opportunity to purchase merchandise at a bargain price, and fame games where contestants had to guess the identity of a famous person based on clues. I loved Sale of the Century as a kid because of the fun gameplay. The questions were often pop culture based and much easier than a show like Jeopardy, as well as the cash and the big ticket prize items. Some of those prizes, though, were absolutely hideous and hilarious. Number 6, Family Feud. The Richard Dawson era of Family Feud was something special. That run was from 1976 to 1985, and once again, it came from super producer Mark Goodson. As we all know, Family Feud features 2 families competing to name the most popular answers to survey questions. But when Dawson hosted, it was so much more than that. The show would open with each family recreating a family portrait, and when Dawson would interview the players, he would kiss all of the ladies, and those ladies wanted those kisses. It was a big deal. Those were the days. Of course, the gameplay is iconic, especially the fast money round, where the high pressure of the situation often produced some of the most hilarious responses in the history of game shows. Number 5, Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune went into the 80s as an NBC daytime show hosted by Chuck Woolery and Susan Stafford. Then it ended the decade in nighttime syndication with host Pat Sajak and Vanna White, and it was watched by over 40 million people every night. We all know Wheel of Fortune, but the 80s syndicated nighttime version was in a league of its own. There was the manual puzzle board, contestants shopping for prizes with their winnings, ceramic Dalmatians, service merchandise gift certificates, and Vanna White in the most 80s fashion and hairstyles you can imagine. I've got an entire video about the forgotten origin story of Wheel of Fortune here on my channel, so if that piques your interest, there's a link to it in the description. Number 4, Scrabble. Another Chuck Woolery hosted show on the list, Scrabble was based on the popular board game, and it ran for 7 seasons between 1984 and 1990. The first round of every game was the crossword round, in which 2 contestants competed to guess words as they were laid out on a computer-generated Scrabble board. Then later, you'd get into the Scrabble Sprint and Bonus Sprint, where contestants could win thousands of dollars. I absolutely loved this game, and I still do. Ultimately, I think it's because of Woolery. He's just an awesome, quintessential 80s game show host. Plus, the board game at home is a lot of fun to play, so that probably has a lot to do with it. But yeah, Scrabble gets number 4 on my list. It just does. And I don't apologize. Number 3, Press Your Luck.
Give me a spin, give me one, and stop! Stop at a Whammy! And Lori is the champion today with $24,685.
I would get destroyed in the comments if this show didn't make the list. I bet I'll still hear from many people who think Press Your Luck should be number 1. And they will have a valid point. Hosted by Peter Tamarkin, Press Your Luck ran from 1983 to 1986. And it is just simply iconic. The one thing we all remember about it is, of course, the whammy. The game is legendary, and there's a video coming up on my channel soon about the man who figured out how to beat the game and ended up winning over $100,000 that CBS had to let him keep. Number 2, The Price is Right.
You bid $16,000 even. Actual retail price, $16,058. You win both showcases with a difference of only $58. You have won $34,646, including 2 automobiles on today's show.
As an 80s kid who got sick and stayed home from school more than once during her childhood, there was no way I could make a best of 80s TV game show list without mentioning The Price is Right from Mark Goodson. But not just any Price is Right. I'm talking about the version hosted by a dark-haired Bob Barker with announcers Johnny Olson and Rod Roddy and Barker beauties named Janice, Holly, and Diane. This version was special and will never be beaten, no matter how long it manages to stay on the air.
Right now, this is Bob Barker reminding you to help control the pet population. Have your pets spayed or neutered. Goodbye, everybody.
Number 1, the $25,000 pyramid.
For $100,000. Here's your first subject, and go.
Banff, Ontario,
Canadian
Toronto.
provinces, places in province.
I'm a bird up north, and it's very cold up here.
Penguins, what penguins say?
A jock strap.
Things an athlete wears.
Things
you use in sports. Things a football player
a
wears.
jock strap, a cheerleading team.
Things at a football team.
A cheerleading team.
Things that are supporters.
Yes. Your belt.
Things that hold things up.
Love handles.
Things that are around your waist.
A hairy drain.
Things that are clogged.
Sandpaper.
Things that are rough.
Sandpaper.
Things that are coarse.
There was nothing better in the world of TV game shows in the 1980s than the $25,000 pyramid hosted by Dick Clark. Well, okay, there was a $100,000 pyramid that aired at nighttime in syndication, but it was the exact same show with even more prize money. There have been several versions of Pyramid over the decades, starting way back in 1973 with a $10,000 Pyramid, and now there's a $100,000 Pyramid airing on ABC with host Michael Strahan. But nothing, I mean nothing, compares to the 80s version with Dick Clark and that amazing theme song. Plus, you had regular appearances by Betty White, Vicki Lawrence, Billy Crystal, celebrities who really knew how to play the game and play it well. Seriously, there are so many amazing winner's circles moments for the pyramid. We'd be here all day if I tried to show them all. Luckily, there are a ton of episodes available to watch on YouTube. And that's my list, the 25 greatest TV game shows of the 1980s, which also happen to be my favorites. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Okay, bye.